Right-wing presidents of modern times agreed with me.
So
it's not left or right, is it?
No, I mean...
Unless you deliberately frame it that way.
Okay, Piers...
In the way that the NRA through the 80s and 90s and this last
Piers,
decade
avoiding the breakdown of left and right
have deliberately
here is
tried to frame this as a left-wing attack on the American Constitution and the Second Amendment. It's exactly what you've tried to do. You come in, you brandish your little book as if I don't know what's in there.
My little book, that's the Constitution of the United States, our founding document,
I know
Piers.
what's in your Constitution.
Do you really?
I've been debating this for a very long time.
Then you should read the Second Amendment again.
I know the Second Amendment. What I haven't heard is one coherent reason why any civilian in America needs an AR-15 military-style assault weapon. Tell me why you need one.
I told you why the general population of America, law-abiding citizens,
why do they
AR-15.
need those weapons?
They need them for the prospective possibility of resistance to tyranny, which is not a concern today. It may not be a concern tomorrow.
Who are you expecting the tyranny to come from?
It could come from the United States because governments have gone tyrannical before.
Do you understand how absurd you sound?
Here's where you go into...
Derry has a dark past. On the 30th of January 1972, 14 innocent protesters were shot dead by British paratroopers. That day would go down in history as Bloody Sunday. This is a film about the struggle over the truth of what happened that day. A struggle between local Derry people on the one hand and the British establishment on the other. 2 years before the shooting took place, the British Army had been called into Northern Ireland to keep the peace. Internment had been introduced. In the small hours of the morning, the British Army would raid people's homes. Those suspected of being IRA members would be taken away and put in prison, but without having a trial.
The 30th of January 1972 was a dark day in Derry. During a civil rights demonstration in the Bogside, paratroopers broke through the barricades and killed 14 innocent protesters.
The British Army was enraged by the fact that this little working class area of about 30,000 people had challenged the might of the British military establishment and detached itself from it. They saw it as an insult to their power, as an insult to their idea of themselves as a dominant force. And very senior British Army officers were clearly sort of almost speechless with anger against Free Derry. And that's in large measure, explains Bloody Sunday. That when the paratroopers came into the Bogside on Bloody Sunday, they came filled with a murderous rage against the people of Free Derry for their nerve, their presumption in actually ejecting British rule from their area.
This document, written by a senior Foreign Office official who would later go on to become an ambassador, sheds some light on how Free Derry was seen from inside Whitehall. I've always been in favour of encouraging the no-go areas to rot from within. There is no reason why we should not encourage the breakdown of essential services and the spread of disease. The Oxford English Dictionary defines collusion as secret or illegal cooperation or conspiracy in order to deceive others. During the Troubles, organs of the British state colluded extensively with terrorist groups, and there's evidence that several hundred people were killed by the army, intelligence and the police, while their agents were working undercover in paramilitary organisations.
Loyalist paramilitary groups here, the UDA, the UVF, shared the same goal as the British government and the British military, which was to defeat the IRA and to maintain the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So in the sense that they shared the same goal, it's not really surprising that sometimes they use their own security forces and sometimes they use loyalist paramilitaries.
Is it true that the British state armed, organised and directed death squads in Northern Ireland?
Oh, there's no question but that the British state organised death squads and organised the assassination of people who were politically opposed to the British presence here, or just the strategy of the British forces. Certainly that they've got the Force Reaction Unit, the FRU, certainly colluded, and this has been demonstrated publicly, colluded with the Ulster Defence Association and the Ulster Volunteer Force, two right-wing loyalist paramilitary organisations, where in effect, if they weren't being run by by elements of the British state, were at least cooperating very closely with elements of the British state. So we did have, there's no question about it, that Britain has indulged in the assassination of political opponents here, and then of course denied point blank afterwards that they had done any such thing. And of course Northern Ireland isn't strange in that regard. Look around the world and look at history, see that every colonial power has used secret forces to assassinate its opponents. What's unusual about Northern Ireland is it's been doing it to white Western English-speaking people, sort of, which is not the usual shape of things.
Pat Finucane was shot dead on the 12th of February 1989.
Pat Finucane was an extremely eloquent, intelligent, West Belfast-born solicitor who believed above all in the rule of law and in the capacity of the law and justice to help people get human rights, to help people's rights be vindicated through the courts.
He was very skilled at, for instance, using European law on behalf of his clients. And at that stage, in the late 1970s, 1980s, the emergency laws that we had here were such that suspects could be held without access to their lawyer for up to a week in any one of the 3 dedicated interrogation centres. And Pat was very skillful at using European law to demand access to his clients and demand habeas corpus and so on. And as such, he was a thorn in the side of the establishment.
Pat Finucane was having dinner with his family about 4 miles from where we're sitting now on a Sunday afternoon when the door rapped. He went to the front door, still with a fork in his hand from his Sunday dinner, and he was shot down in his hallway. He was killed, and then they stood over his prone body on the ground and pumped more bullets into him.
The person who killed him was a member of the Royal Ulster Constabulary Special Branch, working inside the Ulster Defence Association, a loyalist paramilitary group.
The gun came from Army headquarters, the shooter was an agent, the driver was an agent, his accomplice was an agent. They were all direct agents reporting back to their respective organisations and letting them know that this was going to happen. So in advance of this murder, both the military and the police were aware of the plan, aware of the vehicles that were to be used, aware that the gun came from Army headquarters, aware of the escape route and the identities of the individuals. Nothing was done to stop it, nothing was done to warn him or his family, because this was part of the plan. The Irish and British governments appointed a senior Canadian judge, Judge Corrie, to look at the classified documents behind the murder of Pat Finucane and to come to a judgment of whether or not there should be a full public inquiry into his murder as demanded by the families. So this is a senior Canadian judge appointed by both governments, by both prime ministers. He had access to documents that none of the rest of us had seen, and he came to the conclusion that there was involvement of this secret unit of the British Army called the Force Research Unit. So he said that the Force Research Unit and the Special Branch of the Police and MI5, the security service, all had the most serious questions to answer in the murder of Pat Finucane, that they were all aware of it and they were all running agents who were at the heart of the actual murder. So it's no longer an allegation that there was state agents involved in the murder of Pat Finucane. It is established fact.